We're talking once again with Rabbi Leib Tropper. Today the topic is The Chazon Says, Words to Live By. Based on his work called the Kibbutz Igros Reb Leib, we know that the Chazon cautions, urges us, admonishes us, really guides us in some very particular practical things, aspects of our lives. I'd like to talk to you about some of them today because they're not found in very many others' forum. Can you tell us some of the things that in particular that he cautions us to be aware of, to stay away from, and urges us, in fact, to do in other areas?
Thank you. It would be very surprising to the commoner, to the pedestrian, to even the average yeshiva bacher, some of the things that the Chazon Ish cautions against. And if one could adhere to it, I guess there's a special segula and bracha in his life. I'm not going to go from 1, 2, 3, those numbers. I'm going to choose, and then maybe we'll go like what's less severe to the more severe. The first thing Chazon Ish, that's the first thing. One of the things he says in his Hanhogis, he talks about one to avoid the motivation of kavod, chalila, to do certain mitzvahs or ma'asim tovim in his life. That is to stay away from anything that's motivated by kavod. I'm sure that's very hard. I could say that it's the easier thing, but it's really very hard. The kavod could fool you to believe that it's not kavod. I do something for kavod. I don't do things for kavod. So it really means to really introspect and caution oneself that I shouldn't be motivated by kavod when I do something. He also says something very interesting. If I'm in a group, if I'm in a part of a collective group of Talmid Chachamim or just plain pedestrians or ordinary people who are Amcha Beis Yisrael, beautiful Amcha Beis Yisrael, he says, do not do things that are mishuna, that are quite different, that it looks peculiar. Mishuna, lizor milasa is dover mishuna she'ena cherem oisim kein. Don't do things that are so strange that people don't do that. And we come across people who are trying to be very from, extraordinary from, end up doing things that are quite peculiar. And then he adds on a line, v'lizoyer ma'oid b'zeh, to be very careful about that. I can't right now specifically spell out certain things, though I have certain things in my mind, but I leave it to everybody's imagination, the viewer's imagination, about what that means to do things that are look from, smell from, but may not be the Ratzon Hashem as the way the Chazon Ish views it. He also says not to avoid Lizor ma'oid mililvois kesev mishum odom. You should be very careful not to borrow money from people for a number of reasons. He doesn't say the reasons, but it's partial. One could forget that obligation, chas v'shalom, and the consequences in Shemayim and consequences here could be very severe. The other thing is that a person should also, sometimes a person has on his mind, how am I going to get the money to pay him back? And if he has learning or has a job or whatever may be on his mind, it may just interrupt his tranquility, whether it's at home, whether it's in yeshiva. It's interference to having tranquility when you're worried about, like, it's a loan of $25,000, I have a deadline having it next Monday. How am I going to get it? I don't know how I'm going to get it. So, therefore, the Chazon Ish cautions, Lizoher ma'oid shaloi lilvois kesef mishum odom. And we ask a question, how do we live that way? Well, I'll share with you a story. You knew, parents, you had the opportunity to visit my father a number of times, Olav Shalom. And my father, Olav Shalom, was very careful about that. In fact, he was nifter at 94 and plus, and he did not have a debt to his name, private debt to his name. And he was once trying to help somebody get a mortgage. It goes back 25, 30 years ago. And he looked up his TRW, they couldn't find his name. So they asked him, Mr. Tropper, or Rabbi Tropper, which he really was a rabbi. Rabbi Tropper, did you have any time that you borrowed any money? He says, yeah, I think in 1929 I borrowed $11 from my brother Abe. He says, what are you talking about? Get out, like almost telling him to get out of here. You don't belong here. So my father says, you mean you need to owe money to owe more money? I'm the one who's not saying I think this is an insane way of doing business. If I don't owe money, then I can't take a loan. But if I have to owe money, to owe money. To owe more money. Okay, so in any event, so the Chazon Ish cautions against borrowing any money. Of course, there are dire emergencies. Then, of course, we're talking this whole safe from the Chavetz Chaim, but a Malvin, a Leib, whatever. He also cautions, he says, a person should daven. The meat and potatoes of his davening is to escape, to fend off the Yetzer Hara. And should daven, he says, daven for that. In any line, even if you say in English in the middle of his davening, Hashem, please spare me from the Yetzer Hara. We say it in the morning in davening by brachas, but you should say it again in Yishmon Esrei. And you say, Levad, sheyetzim min halev. It shouldn't be something that is kind of just perfunctory. It should be something that comes min halev, from the heart. That's where resides the rotzen of Dveikus and the Bari Olam. That's where he should be saying this from, this tefillah. And then he adds on one more very, very severe caution. And I prefer reading it to you because I don't want to interpret it by my just saying it in English. To be very cautious. Me'achilas tainug, from eating things that are just pleasureful. If we have mishnayos all over Shas, b'tumas haguf, yesh rishon l'tumah, this is something that's a rishon l'tumah. Shrotzim yesh avad tumah and gaviyah v'es tumah. All those things, different levels of tumah by different things that are touched by someone. B'tumas hanefesh, in the impurity of soul, shel milui hataiva, fulfilling the every desire that one has with food. Ba'achilas tainug, in eating only the delightful food in the world that makes him feel great, and everything he sniffs that smells good, he has to eat it, and looks good, he has to, has to eat it. Mis'ached, there's a joining, is emerging of Rishon l'tumah, of hatumah, and Avi Avois hatumah. They all merge together. Nothing that we find anywhere else. And then he says, Achilas tainig is davar zehu min hashvelim ma'oid. They are from the lowest class things that one could do. And ma'akva mesalimid, of course, they interfere with the learning and other things in life and a person's growth in ruchnius. He quotes Tosfos that if a person wants to grow in his ruchnius, he should be mispalel that he should mispalel to the Eibush, of course, that he should grow, but he should also grow. He should also mispalel that he should cease from indulging in the gashmis. Achilas tainug. That's regarding the question that you asked.
There are many other things which he addresses, and there's an interesting concept that's brought down in the Gemara in Sota that says that there's a concept, I believe, Leib, of smol docha v'yimim kareves, to push away with the left hand and pull close with the right hand. But is it true that the Chazon Ish had a daya that said actually you should makar b'shnei yadayim, to bring close with two hands?
This is brought down in the Pe'er Hadar from the Chazon Ish to Rav Kohn Zecher Tzadik Livrocha and other svarim on the Chazon Ish. And the Gemara, it says, I guess, a person Olam shmikarev biyamin derech b'smail v'loy ki Yeshua ben Prachia, not like Yeshua ben Prachia, the dochel, he pushed away Oisa Ish, the person that celebrated on that holiday in December, shedochel b'shtei yadayim, that Yeshua ben Prachia pushed away with both his hands. And the Gemara goes into detail the story of what happened. It had been edited since, sometimes put back, but it's, I think in Daf Mem Ches site, you can see some in Shas and have like almost half a page empty because it has that story there. So the Chazon Ish on the Gemara, where it says a person should sometimes says Mekar b'yamin derech b'smol, so Chazon Ish had a footnote on the side, it was own ksav yad, which read ulepa'omim mitzvah lekarev b'shtei yadayim. Sometimes it's a mitzvah, it's an obligation, mekarev someone with both his hands, and not use any hand to reject chas v'shalom. And one chachma and a good rebbe could figure out those times when that's important. It shouldn't be an impetuous decision, but one should be discussing it with someone who's greater than them. But that's what the Chazon Ish held. He also, I mentioned, I think Peretz actually reminded me about the story with the Rav Dessler, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. Rav Dessler, people in the yeshiva complained to the Chazon Ish that Rav Dessler, who was the mashgiach of Panovich, was very gentle even with those who were troublemakers in the yeshiva. And Some Talmidim felt that there should be like a stronger hand. There should really be a, tough words spoken. And the Chazon Ish told these Talmidim who came to protest, he says, there's a kaimelon in Choshen Mishpat. It means there's a psak halacha in Choshen Mishpat that Meshicha is a better kinyan than Chazaka. Meaning the Gemara says you want to be kind of an animal. So you kairei love hiba is Meshicha. That's like Meshicha. You call, you whistle, and speak sweetly. Come on, and he comes over. That's a better kinyan. That's it's called Meshicha. It's a better kinyan than Chazaka. So that's how Reb Chazon Ish viewed the softness and the gentleness of Rav Dessler as a kinyan Meshicha, that he was just trying to be Moishech these Talmidim, the Torah and mitzvahs, but mitach ava, love, unconditional love, but with boundaries.
Looking at pictures of the Chazon Ish should suggest not only somebody who is awe-inspiring, but it almost has a stern type of appearance at times, and that belies the astonishing compassion that he displays in everything that he says, particularly a situation where, let's say, somebody is in service somewhere else, so they have difficulties, and a person would like to help, but they can't. They don't have the wherewithal, the resources, or physically they're not able to. And the Chazon Ish talks about how a person can actually help no matter what situation they're in.
That's a fascinating concept. The Chazon Ish does at one of his letters, which I should actually read to some. It may be helpful. He talks about trying to help other people when you really sometimes can't. And I'll read you what he says, because it's really so musical and poetic and such a what should I say, such euphonic sounds of Torah. It really gives the beauty of the words of Torah. As this writes him, I don't know the beginning of the letter, but this is what he says. Choser l'cha, you're missing hergesh alishtatfis b'tzar zoloscha. There are many of us like that, who are missing what it means. We have some kind of a voyeuristic understanding of somebody else's pain, but we don't really have the actual pain b'tzar zoloscha. We're not really mishtatif. We're not partnering with another person's pain. The eitzah to get rid of that problem and to become someone who can potentially become a partner in somebody else's tzar is hashtadlis lehitiva ulatzila mitzar. Only action could motivate the machshava, like the Ramchal says, the Chinuch says in Parshas Boy. Only action can be ma'orer the Leib. V'hamaisa po'eles ala Leib, and the Maisa impacts the heart. This is a very, very powerful. I ask you to please pay attention to these words of the Chazon Ish, because this really is spectacular. To daven on the tzara of someone else, even though you can't, somehow pour out your whole heart. They're not coming from like this ultimate source, and maybe it's not. But you're uttering the words with understanding of what it means, of course. But he says, even Imam Tztayer, the one who you're davening for, who has a tzar, Hamoini, he's a regular pedestrian hedjit, simple person. Ubazui, he's a low class person, or maybe even worse. Even then, you should sit and daven. You have to mishtatev b'his tzar at least, with davening in a way that you mean it, that he should be helped. Va'af im hamitztayer hu hamoini hedjoit ubozui. So that's something to remember. The words of the Chazon Ish of who we should be davening for, and who should we not exclude from our davening. We should include those people who, to us, sometimes feel, "This is come on, please. What is he? I mean." I think he packs boxes in some store or whatever. I mean, I have to have kavanah for people who are, Klal Yisrael desperately needs. Well, what about who the Eibishter needs? The Eibishter needs every Yid.
That would obviously include ourselves also. The Chazon Ish doesn't overlook the fact that we have to include ourselves in those things.
Correct.
One of the things that Rabbi mentioned earlier on was about the need to watch what we eat, to be careful about what we eat, and the Chazon Ish really emphasizes this in many places. But perhaps that's part of his overall derech in terms of preserving one's health. We talk a little bit about that in terms of the context of food and other areas where he said that it's really a Torah obligation to preserve one's health really very, very well.
So this is fascinating. I discovered, a while ago, years ago, I used to have a seder in the Kibbutz Igros Chazon many times. I did this seder. So he says, Min ha'choiva. He says it's an obligation. Allah Adam uses his words, I guess choicefully, uses his words like very carefully. Allah Adam l'shtadel berefuas atzmai, to put effort into his own, or to, I guess try with his own refuah. Kamoshu chayav, no less than he's chayav b'shtadle refuas chaveiroi, no less than he's obligated in somebody else's refuah. Ulechein tishtadel no lesgabel al rotzonis hativius. Don't be such a wise guy and ignore the doctor's suggestions or the doctor's declarations or his prescribed method of healing. Ulamale, please fill everything a doctor tells you for what they find for the benefit of health. Just like Bikkur Chaylim, the whole purpose is to help the person who's sick. You're helping your own self as a mitzvah of Bikkur Chaylim also. That's one thing. But there's another letter which I probably can't find right now. I just want to share that with you. I may have mentioned it before. I have some kind of feelings that I remember this. I mentioned it before, but somebody was writing a letter to Chazon Ish that he had this feeling that he needed vacation from his learning. He was very, very, he felt that it was difficult for him to go on the whole time, and the Chazon Ish was very, very empathetic. And he wrote him something that shook up a lot of, people in yeshiva, because it was something that was not an ordinary thing for a gadol to say. I'll just see if I could find this for a second. If not, then I'll just remember.
This was somebody who was feeling they needed to get away or to take a
they needed a break. They needed a break. They needed a break from learning or from whatever it was. So the Chazon Ish wrote him in the letter. He says, I just want to tell you that Teva ha'odam, I don't find it right now here, Teva ha'odam lis ayif. The nature of a person is to get tired. The whole, whatever is beteva is not called bittul Torah. That's not called bittul Torah. That's not for wasting time. Here it is. I found it here. Okay. You're not violating anything at all. It's the laws of nature to become tired. You should not try to tamper with the laws of Teva. What we call nature. What is the meaning of nature? You know what the meaning of nature is. Rotzen hayoser masmud shalom hava kolavai is a Kadosh Baruch Hu's continuous rotzen. Like we look at the sun coming down in the morning, it's as Teva, but Teva is not, doesn't preclude the Eibishter's rotzen to keep it every morning. It should be the same. I mean, doesn't have to be that way. So Teva means the rotzen of the Bari Olam, and that's what he says it is. Teva odom leis ayev. It's nature of person. So what does he do? What does he suggest? What does he ask? L'chein chivoscha, it's your obligation. Lahafsek limudcha, to stop learning. Legamri, completely. Al meshach shtei shavuos, 2 weeks now. B'tarbe, and you should increase. Kalkola umozin, food. But you're eating Mozen Mavri, healthy food. That doesn't mean, going out and eating whatever. I mean, ice cream sandwiches, 16 of them for the day. L'haisef al hashina. At the end, sleep more. Don't sit there with your conscience worrying and eating you up. Wait, I'm not learning. V'hatil, and take trips. V'oid me inyonei habatola. And do other things that normally we would consider batola. This is a very powerful message about the Chazon Ish. And the way we look, as you mentioned before, President, I was responding to the general message. The Chazon Ish looks with a stern face and very, very firm and very, very strict and very, 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 almost like, he's sometimes obstinate in his opinions and doesn't move and anything else. He's incorrigible. But there's so much humanism, love for a human being in the Chazon Ish that it's one has to go and really learn the Chazon Ish to really know who he is. It's like otherwise, it's the peripheral, fictitious understanding of who the Chazon Ish is.
One of the things that you mentioned at one point, Rabbi, was that he had a Kabbalah from the Chofetz Chaim, which took an interesting form in terms of not coming on to people. As much as he understood that we have to help people, he felt that we should not come on to people. And he had an interesting day, which you've talked about, in terms of not asking for something from somebody repetitively.
So here's the letter. It's a letter. It's Kuf Nun Ches. I think people should look this up. It's something that I find important. Hiskarti, of course, if it's a tzedakah and if it's for someone else, they're not included in this. Hiskarti michtav sheni al davar whatever. Somebody asked him to do something a second or third time. I don't know which time, but he says, "Listen to me. I cannot ask again. Why? I relied on what was something which is custom in the mouth of the Chofetz Chaim, was on his tongue all the time. To me, ben odom ein marvim levakesh. From another person, we don't ask too much. We don't expect too much, as the Chazon Ish writes in his Emunah B'Tachon, and where you don't ask too much, as the Chofetz Chaim normally has said. So, I think that's pretty profound. These things in the Chofetz Chaim, from the Chofetz Chaim.
Leib Tropper, thank you for sharing those words of the Chazon Ish, words to live by, which we hope to hear a lot more about.
Thank you.